Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Recalibration, and today I want to go over another build. And this build is going to be a little bit different because I have gone over this build before, but I want to go over the updates I've made to it, and I want to go back over it because this is one of the builds that's not really going to be affected by the upcoming update that changes a bunch of talents and balancing in the game from all the information we currently have. So this build is the 377 build, so maximum of 3 red, and you need a minimum of 7 blue and 7 yellow to make the build work. Now, before I get into the rest of the build, I want to go over what talents are actually supposedly going to be changed in the next update if the changes that are already on the PTS go through. So what I've seen from the PTS, from other people talking about it, I can't really get into it. My character's not really there. Is that Optimus is in some way going to get nerfed. And this is the best talent right now, so we have to see if that's nerfed enough to not want to use it and to use something else. And besides that, nothing else in this build is actually going to be getting nerfed. And actually, the compensated talent has already been found to be buffed. So what it's going to do is it's going to give you 20% increased damage instead of 15%, but you're going to need to have 15% critical hit chance, or below 15% instead of 20. And that really doesn't affect me that much because I only have 5% critical chance just from a mod on my weapon. So we can go right into the weapons of this build. Now, the first weapon is going to be an AR. This build is really easy to use other weapons with, depending on, what your rolls are. So I have the 10% assault rifle damage on that, and then I have the Fenrir for the 10% assault rifle damage. So you could definitely change some stuff up and say I have LMG rolls on this and LMG roll piece. I forget what that's called. That is the brand set for the LMG increased damage. You can use LMG with this build as well. It's really versatile on what main weapon you can actually use, but you're definitely going to want to be using some type of time scope, and I'll go over that in a second. So I am using the custom P416, pretty obvious. This is pretty much one of the, if not the best weapon in the game, especially for PvE. It's a assault rifle, so you have the health damage increase. It does have Optimus on it, which is like the best talent right now. We see if it gets nerfed, which is increased damage for every 10% of the magazine missing. I do have a Lager on it, so it is a pretty good roll. The last roll could be better, but it's not that big of a deal. For the mods on this weapon, I am using a 4x scope. Now, the reason you should be using any scope that actually has a times on the side, so 8 times this would have to zoom in, but anything below 8 should not zoom you in like a normal scope that you're looking through. It should just be a normal, ADS, and you're not actually looking through a scope. And the reason you want anything with times on the side, I don't have another one. So you have a 12 times here, that's a normal scope. I don't have another one. The best one I've seen is the scope that gives 5% damage to elites, and that's the best one. I haven't gotten that yet, but any time scope that you don't have to zoom in with but has this 4 times, because that will actually activate the holster talent for Nemesis, which we'll go over in a second. With the rest of the mods, I'm using the 10% increased rounds. This mod right here, I'm getting the 5% critical chance because I don't have another damage increase, and this is the only critical chance I have, so it's just I can possibly hit critical hits now, so I think it will increase the damage a bit. If I had something like damage to elites or any other damage mod, I would probably use that over the critical chance because it's not a critical hit chance or damage build. The muzzle is 5% damage to elites, probably one of the best damage ones you're going to get for ARs. The secondaries I just talked about is the Nemesis, and we're mainly using it for the holster talent. While holster gain 25% headshot damage when scoped with your current weapon. Now, as I was talking about, if you use a scope that's still a times at the side right here, like a 4 times, something like that, it's still going to give you that headshot damage that you would get from, say, using an 8 times scope. So it's still considered a scope, so it'll still give you the damage increase, except for something like this, you don't have to actually zoom in through the scope to use it. So anything like that and you'll be good. And that's pretty much the only reason we're using Nemesis. It is an actual good weapon if you want to use it as a secondary. If you run out of ammo or you want to snipe something, it can still be used, but we're mainly using it for that holster talent. Your secondary can be whatever you want. Some people like the talent that when you roll, it removes effects off you. You can use whatever. This doesn't really matter in the build that much. Now when we get into our gear pieces, it's mainly just going with the 377. So as I said before, you just have to follow the colors and get as much damage out of that as you possibly can. Now my helmet, it's actually wyvern wear, a different set piece, or if I could get this set piece would still put me below what the compensated is going to be. But my brand sets usually aren't the best in this build. I think they're okay, but they're not the best, especially with the wyvern wear. I don't get much use out of that. But I have the skill power roll for one of my yellows, and then I have one of I think one of the highest damage to elite rolls, which is 42%. I think the max I've ever heard of is 45%, which like almost nobody has. Then I have the hard hitting talent roll on this, which is probably the best you're going to be able to get. So this is a pretty well rolled helm, even though it's only 465. Then for my backpack, which you're going to need on the ropes on, that's the main thing you're going to want on it. It's also my second piece of wyvern wear. I could definitely use a different brand set on these, even if it was something like total armor or damage reduction or something like that. It would still be better. Then I have one yellow roll and two blue rolls on this with on the ropes and hard hitting. Again, hard hitting. It's probably going to be the best talent. You can definitely try to get the headshot damage talent. Whatever that's called, headhunter or something. You can definitely try to get that if you're seeming like, if you're facing more non-elite enemies and you're seeming like they're harder to kill for you. It does help that you have the damage to health if you're facing non-elite enemies, so that helps kill them quicker. And then I have a defensive roll on for another blue. Now for the chest piece, I do have a decent-ish roll on this now because it is a Fenris, so I do get the assault rifle damage, which I'm using an assault rifle. I have one blue and one yellow rolled on this with a pretty high damage headshot roll that I wasn't able to increase at all, which I probably would have been able to increase since it's only 500, but I did have to roll the unstoppable force on it, which is probably the highest damage increase on this build. And as I showed at the beginning of the video, I think I was doing over 2.6 million DPS on the targets, and this would give like what a 30 to 40% increase, however the math comes out to be. So it's going to be over 3 million DPS overall, and when this procs, I mean, you're going to be able to proc it pretty easily most of the time, especially if you're solo. You're just going to be doing ridiculous damage. Then I have the hard hitting on this as well. Then another defensive mod roll for another blue. Now this one, I could definitely make this better by, I don't know, maybe this headshot damage is actually okay, but if this rolled on top of force, I could roll higher on that, or go weapon damage roll if you're not as comfortable with getting you know, as many headshots, if you want to do that. So for the gloves, I got an assault rifle roll. You can definitely go a few percent higher than this. I think the highest I've heard of is 13% for the damage on this. I think I have a 12. But yeah, so just a 10% roll on this. Then I have compensated, which is also pretty important. This is why you can only have 3 red. Weapon damage is increased by 15% when the critical chance is below 20. We only have 5, so we're fine on that. And this is going to be technically buffed in the next patch. If all those changes go through, so we'll get another 5% increased damage from this, and that's pretty much it. The accuracy is okay. I don't know if we could actually get any other roll. Another Araldi would actually be good. Getting an Araldi for a backpack or a helm roll would actually be pretty good with this build, because then I could get that 10% increased headshot damage. And the only thing I would lose if I did one of these is drone skill, which I don't even use a drone. So that would definitely be a pretty decent damage increase if I could get that as a roll. Now my piece right here, the holster, is one of the gear set pieces, just because these gear set pieces roll so well for these color builds, I guess. So it rolled 2 yellows, but then I got 2 more yellow slots. Even though this is a blue, this still gives you a yellow. So this is 4 of the yellows I need just in this one piece. So that's a pretty big help. Gear pieces definitely seem to roll that much more commonly than just high-end pieces. So that's pretty much just all yellow on that piece. Now, one of the bigger changes I made with this build is I'm not using, actually, let me pull it out so you guys can see it. I am not using this right here. I'm not using Patience, which this was the piece I was using before, which had Patience on it. Had a lot more bonus armor, which kind of sucks losing, and Patience was so useful. But in the patch notes, the next patch, if it goes through, this is going to require, I think, 11 blue instead of 7. So it's just going to be ridiculous to get 11 blue, and I want to be able to. So there's not even a use for the next patch. And just because I wasn't needing as much, because I have so many chem launcher heals up that I really don't need the extra healing. So I got a roll that has 15% damage to elites, or something that could roll that damage to elites on. So that's pretty much just a 15% damage increase most of the time, which is a pretty big damage increase. I get the health roll. Not the best of brand set rolls again, but then I have a defensive roll into this, which gives me the rest of the blues I need. And this build gives me, since I have so many blues, 211,000 armor, which is pretty good. You're pretty tanky. And you have a decent amount of HP with this just really high percentage damage increases. So you're hitting really hard, as we saw in the beginning of the video. And that wasn't even, that doesn't even show the actual strength of this build, because you're getting so much damage increase from your Unstoppable Force talent here, and you're getting so much damage from just the health damage if you're facing enemies that have more health, all that type of stuff. So the target range doesn't show the exact power of this build, even though it is still pretty strong at the target range. Now the abilities I'm using Pulse Jammer, which this thing basically just lets off a really quick ability, since basically this ability you hold and it channels to get larger. I'll show you in the target range. So it's super easy to use because you can just hit it and now it's on cooldown, which you want just, it on cooldown as quick as possible. Then you're using the chem launcher for your secondary, because the chem launcher will activate you're on the ropes. Say it has 3 charges baseline like it has. If I use 1 charge, it'll activate on the ropes. So you just have to have 1 charge down, and then your on the ropes will be active, and you can still keep your other 2 or more charges if you have mods on it. You can keep those charges for actually healing yourself while you have the on the ropes active. And for the specialization I'm using the sharpshooter for pretty obvious reasons. This is one of the best, this is probably the best talent tree in the game if you're going at all for headshot, because right here you get 25% increased headshot damage. This weapon is pretty stable for an AR with this high fire rate, so headshots are not super hard to get. You're just destroying with the amount of headshot damage you get. Then you have more stability, which helps you hit headshots more, 30% increased stability, which is just overall really insane, actually. Then you get 30% increased reload speed, which reload speed is good for absolutely everything, so that just helps you overall put out more damage and just to reload quicker. So that's why we're using the specialization build, not really for the signature weapon. I almost never use that. But that is pretty much the entire build. I want to go over an update version. There's still a lot of stuff I could optimize this build with, but going into the next patch, if the patch notes stay what they are now and the changes stay what they are in the PTS, this build will still be the same strength or stronger with the recalibration changes coming. So this build will just get stronger with exactly how I have it. If the patch goes out to how it's being tested right now, this build will get quite a bit stronger. So that is the entire build. Subscribe if you want to see more Division 2 content. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you think about Division 2 as a whole, what you think about this build, and thanks for watching.
Encrypted signal source detected. That sounds promising. Could be a way to intercept Blacktown's comms. Look for a terminal that you can patch Isaac into.
Enemy transmission intercepted.
This is Wyvern. Prep the helos. We need to get these antivirals out of here. The division is inside the compound.
You need to make sure none of those birds get airborne.
The containers are ready for pickup. What's the status on those helos?
Gonna be a few more minutes. We're working on it.
Shit, copy that.
Find a way to keep those helicopters grounded. I got you, brother. They're trying to flank us.
I see them moving up. Wyvern, the helo's out of commission.
How the fuck did that happen? This situation needs to get locked down. Now. See to it personally.
Copy that.
An agent needs assistance.
I'm taking heavy fire. Flank these fuckers. Stop them!
Agent down.
Enemy's trying to flank us.
Serious trauma detected. An agent needs assistance.
Sounds like you're gonna need all the help you